Psychologist licensed in New York. I'm actually currently working out of my home because of COVID, and I live in New Jersey.
Fantastic. Now, let's touch on this. You are a psychologist. Can you tell everyone a little bit more about what kind of psychologist you are and specifically what it is that you're doing now with those skills?
Yeah, so it's so interesting that you asked that. So, as far as being a psychologist, once, at least in the United States, once you get licensed, we all have the same title as psychologist if you get licensed at a level of having a doctorate. One of the other things that I'm currently doing is I'm doing consulting and coaching work with entrepreneurs and business leaders, especially those who run larger companies and organizations. And what I like to focus on is what I call adaptability, which if you are seeing this, you may notice over my shoulder over here, it says adapt. And so what I focus on really is helping both leadership and the organization at large learn to be able to tune in to the signals and what is indicating to them, whether it's to the company or to the leader, that there's a need to adapt and kind of show them how to really tap into that so that it can really become a superpower. So I talk a lot about adaptation. I talk a lot about also the part of our brains that is actually designed to help us adapt, which is actually called and is known as the limbic system, or, God forbid we call it emotions or feelings, but, our emotion system.
I love that. Talk to me a bit more about adaptability and what you're doing, because you're working with some very high level people. So adapting sometimes doesn't seem like an option for them. They've been down this path for a long time. You're undoing a lot of, I guess, work that they've done for years. How do you do this?
Yeah, it's a great question. One of the things that I think is really important, and we often learn to ignore or even worse than that, kind of suppress, is that we have a system in our brain. So we have multiple systems in our brain. Obviously, our brains do a lot of stuff. One of the things that our brain does is it helps us develop habits, ways of getting our needs met, or ways of addressing what needs to get done for ourselves, for our families, for communities, and in the case of business, in organizations, whether it's a business company, large corporation, small. And so there are parts of our brain that are really dedicated and designed to help us develop or build those habits. If you've ever heard of anybody talk about having a morning routine, a nighttime routine, this routine, that routine, it's been such a big part of helping people organize themselves, getting some of their or many of their needs met in a consistent way so that they can kind of stop spending so much energy on that and put their energy elsewhere. There's a flip side to that, which is sometimes our habits or our ways of doing things to get our needs met or to accomplish our goals, they stop working. And it could stop working for any number of reasons. It could be because the needs or the goals have changed. It could be because the circumstances have changed. Anybody who's living in a country where COVID has led to having lockdown and social distancing and all of these changes to our daily lives will know the experience very viscerally now of having our habits torn apart, having our way of getting our needs and our goals met just completely pulled out from under us like a rug. And most of us really got knocked on our backside that way. And, COVID is not the only example. It's just one of the most recent and biggest examples. And many of us are still struggling to find our ways of accomplishing our goals and meeting our needs. And so what I really do is I fancy myself an adaptability hacker. And so one of the things that I've really done is help people tap into the other side of their brain that isn't just about making habits, but about changing them when they need to be changed. And one of the really basic parts of our brain that's actually really designed to do that is it's called our limbic system. It's our emotion system. And so I have a very particular definition for a feeling and emotion and all kinds of other words like mood. And there's so many different words that we use. A feeling is my body sending signals. It gives me data about something, whether it's myself internally, whether it's about my body, or it's about the external world. And those signals, in addition to just giving me that data, it also tries to direct me either towards or away. And then it's driving me. It tries to drive me to either slam on the brakes and stop what it is that I'm doing, or hit the gas and go. And so our emotion system and our feelings are trying to get us to pay attention to something, to make a change, because that whole system is designed to help us shift or change our behavior in order to get our needs met because it's telling us there's something that isn't getting met right now or something that's under threat or in danger.
I guess what we're talking about, or what you're talking about more, is it's like creativity. We say that kids have great creativity and we lose it as adults. Well, it's the same with adaptability and routines. I mean, how important, if anyone who's watching has children, how important are routines? And if you knock that, it knocks you for days, and it can knock you for like all night kind of thing. But kids are very adaptable. They have to, because they're learning continually. So you're almost bringing these leaders back to what it was like to be a child, to have that vulnerability and to be adaptability and creativity and all of that again. Would that be right?
So sometimes it really is about that. And sometimes it's about something a little bit different, because not all of our feelings are creative feelings. Not all of our reactions are there to help us be creative. Some of them are to help us make sense of and adjust to something else. When people talk about sadness, and if you have kids, you know that they have a lot of sadness at different times for various reasons. They can drop their ice cream or their lollipop and suddenly they're extremely sad, or maybe they wanted to watch something on TV, or they wanted to do some kind of activity, or they wanted to play with a toy and another kid took it, and now they're bawling out of nowhere. I mean, it's not out of nowhere from my perspective, but those emotions aren't necessarily seen as creative per se, but on the other hand,
but they're not suppressed either, which is fantastic. Right. Whereas adults, that's what we suppress. Whether it's emotions, creativity, adaptability, we suppress all that to try and conform.
Sometimes really to conform, yeah. Sometimes it's conforming to what other people expect of us. Sometimes it's conforming to the story that I have created or how I think about myself, whether it's an identity that I have or something that I wish I could be or could have or could create. There's, and there's upsides like anything. I think it's not what you're doing, it's why you're doing it that makes all the difference. So, is it that you're holding on to this narrative or this story because you don't know who you are without it? Or is it that you're holding on to it because it's very meaningful to you and that's how you would like to be in this situation and other situations? I think it's not about what you're doing, it's about why you're doing it. So what I often do is, to the point you're saying, is I help people really connect with parts of themselves that are trying to help them that we often suppress or ignore or try to push away. And then when we do that, what we end up doing is actually kind of hobbling ourselves, often without realizing it.
And look, I'm going to bring this to personal branding because that's what I'm interested in, but it's very similar, that whole adaptability and routines. Well, when I talk to people about building their personal brand, the routines are, generally speaking, would be that consistency in showing up. But the adaptability is the fact that your personal brand today is completely different to what it was 10 years ago and what it will be in 10 years' time. You are not linear. Hence why I've got that nice little infinity on my relevant logo, because you are ever adapting, whether you know it or not. And I really love what you do, Dr. Yishai, because for those of you who haven't come across Dr. Yishai yet, like, we were very good friends and we catch up over Zoom, have done most of the year before COVID, during, and just still catching up. You teach me a lot about how it's okay to lean into that and lean into what your why is and the fact that you're changing. I mean, my business and what I'm doing with personal branding has changed, or you've seen it change in the time that we've been speaking. So you give me some more examples of some of these great things you're doing with, like, I don't consider myself a great leader yet, but you're working with some high level powerhouses. What's the change you're making for them?
Yeah, thank you. So I'm going to talk to 2 points. One, but just before I jump into that question, which is a wonderful question, is I am currently in a phase of also shifting and changing and adapting. So one of the things that I'm currently doing is I realize that a lot of what I do isn't just coaching. And so instead of focusing on coaching, which I'm still doing, I am also really looking at consulting, because I help their businesses adapt, not just people. So, or not just the leadership. So that's something that I'm currently doing and shifting into, is acknowledging or recognizing something that I'm already doing that is really important to show and communicate and talk about. And that's by way of the personal brand pieces that you were mentioning. I'm sure we'll come back to that. In terms of what I do with and discuss with leaders. So one of the fundamental things, are two really important things that I think leadership and really great leadership either intuitively knows or learns, or sometimes doesn't learn and can really get in the way. One of them is to recognize that when a leader really cares about their company, that when they have a feeling, when something happens, whether they end up losing a lot of money or their sales have really slowed down or they got hit really hard by COVID or there's a litigation or something else that shows up, when there's something that happens in the company, well, that leader is going to have a set of reactions. And a lot of people, their initial response is they get overwhelmed, or we actually call it in psychology, it's often called flooding, where there are all these chemicals and physical sensations in our body that show up when we have a feeling. And so all of those show up and they show up really big. And then they get overwhelmed and they're like, I don't know what to do with this. And then it feels like all of this is just getting in the way because they feel pulled in multiple directions or they don't know what to do with what they're experiencing. And so one of the things I help them do is to slow down, to actually increase their limit, their ability to handle what is coming on their shoulders, whether it's their feelings and or the stress of what it is that's going on in the company. And then I also help them start to ask and get in touch with the questions and the purpose of those feelings, that they're really trying to be helpful. And as I do that with them, what they find is instead of their feelings getting in the way, instead of their emotions becoming the obstacle, those are actually their superpower. It helps them. They learn to harness those things. And there's a lot of pieces to that, but the basic set of pieces to it, which I mentioned before, are recognizing that every reaction, every feeling has three purposes, not just one, but three. They give you data, information about yourself or your environment. They give you direction, and then they also drive you. A really simple example of that is if I walk out this morning, or when I walk out this morning, I experience it being really cold. That's data. My body is telling me that the temperature is low and lower than I am comfortable. And then it's going to give me direction. Maybe I'm experiencing in my body, there's a shivering, or I'm getting that sensation of cold, which can at some point, if it's cold enough, can be really painful. It's going to then direct me. I'm going to start to look for where can I go that's warmer, or where can I get a sweater, right? So my brain is then trying to direct me to do something that will increase the kind of temperature or my experience temperature, and then it's going to drive me. It's going to actually motivate and give me a kick in the backside, say like, hey, you got to get a sweater on, or like get into the, get indoors.
That's really interesting. Something else you've just mentioned there about the flooding and overwhelm, which you talk about a lot and you actually make it really easy to understand, is the fact that you can have two opposite feelings, but they're still valid. And I think
Yes.
that was massive for me. I can be angry and I can be happy at the same time. I can be grateful and I can be frustrated at the same time. It's that conflict.
Yeah, I see that all the time. One of the things, and to your point also, this is something that I talk a lot with leadership about, is a lot of people do this thing where they say, I'm not allowed to be mad because I am supposed to feel grateful or happy. And so what they do is they end up kind of pitting them against each other in this like death match, as if only one feeling can exist. And one of the big issues with that, from my experience, and I do this work, all day, every day with patients, and then I also do it with my clients who are leaders. It's so important to recognize that when your feelings, when your reactions have a purpose, that you may have, because situations are complicated, you may have multiple reactions, multiple feelings, because each of those is trying to help you with its own job, with its own purpose or purposes. It's trying to help direct and motivate and give you this information. And if you're tuned into it, you can acknowledge or recognize human beings, we have this capacity to experience not only, but upwards of 10 feelings, 10 emotions at a time. And if you can really untangle it, what you can do is turn every single one of them into motivation. You could turn every single one of them into concrete information and strategies and tactics that you can use in order to get your goals, get your needs met, address what needs to be addressed.
How can like someone who's listening just now, how can they actually identify what feelings that they have and like then actually start to hone in on why? Because right now we could have someone who's watching who's really, really angry, but they've just had a really lovely dinner with their lovely partner and their family. So they should be feeling happy. How do they start identifying where these feelings are coming from and why they've got so many at the same time?
Yeah, it's a great question. one of the things that I'm actually working on is I'm working on some projects to help people identify what they're feeling more clearly. So I'll give you in brief example those two things you're talking about. So we experience happiness. I think happiness as a feeling is not that complicated. And if you want to be happy, it's actually in a way, there's a lot of work to it, but in another sense, it's actually not that complicated. It can be really simple. Happiness shows up when you have one of the four following things happen. You just had a want, a need, a goal, or a dream get met. That's when happiness shows up.
Yep.
And what happiness does, so we're going to talk about the three purposes of happiness. What happiness does is the data it gives me is, hey, this just happened. It fulfilled a want, a need, a goal, or a dream. And that's the first thing it does, is it gives me that data. It's a very pleasurable experience. And the second thing it does is it's going to direct me. So in the future, if I want or need or have a goal or I have a dream, guess what my happiness is going to say? Hello, we know how you can get it. Go do this thing. Go do this thing that you did. A really simple example of that is if you're walking around somewhere and you're starving, and then you find a restaurant, you go in and you order something, and the food is wonderful. You're going to experience, most likely, happiness. Now, you can feel all kinds of other things. If the service takes a long time, you might be frustrated, and you can also be happy because you still got the food, albeit later than you had wanted, right? But the next time you're in that area, guess what your brain is going to think?
I've got to go there.
Got to go there, right? That's the part of our brain also that recommends other people do it, and for people that we care and we like, right? It's the part of our brain, and that's what happiness does, is it gives us this data, and then it's going to direct us, and it's going to direct us to go toward that. And then the third thing it does is it really drives. It gives us a kick, right? It's like, go there again, or tell other people to go there. And so that's a really kind of concrete way in which you can understand that your reaction is telling you those things. Like I said, because situations can be complicated, you can get your need for nutrition met while at the same time experiencing frustration because it took longer than you wanted to. Maybe you're even angry. And so you can experience all of those various things. Anger, for example, that you were talking about, Megan, anger shows up when we have this line. We all have lines. And when somebody crosses over one of those lines, we experience anger. Anger gives me the data, the information that, hey, I have this line. There's something that's important to me, whether it's an expectation or a way that I like to be treated or don't like to be treated, right? It could be respect or autonomy or freedom. It could be something that's important to me, might be being connected or feeling connected. When somebody or something crosses over that line or potentially takes that way, we'll experience anger. Anger says, first of all, that line got crossed. There's this thing that's important to you, and it's gone, or it's not happening, or somebody or something is pushing over that line. The second thing it's going to do is direct me. It's going to say, pay very close attention, look and figure out who or what that is. And the third thing it's going to do, it's going to give me drive. It's going to give me a kick in the backside, and it's going to encourage me to give that person or thing a kick in the backside because it wants that out of where that they crossed over the line. Now, I would say it's not useful most often, and there's a lot of research on this. It's not effective to give other people a kick in the backside just to get them out of that line. It's better to communicate and learn how to enforce or reinforce those lines. So you can experience anger, and you can experience that at the same time as you're experiencing happiness. And each of those different feelings has a different purpose, and so they're going to show up. And for some people, they get really confused because, like some kind of a death match, they keep pitting them against each other. Well, I'm not allowed to be angry. I'm not supposed to be angry that it took so long because, well, I got my food eventually. You can experience both. You can say, I love the food and I had a wonderful time experiencing, eating the food there. And it took longer than I had hoped, longer than I had wanted. And I felt really upset about that. I really wanted it to come sooner, and I wish it would come sooner.
They are great analogies, ones that, Joe Blogs can kind of visualize to understand what it is you do on a larger scale for leaders, which is fantastic. Like, I can't rate Dr. Yishai enough. But I want to touch a little bit about how you ended up an adaptability hacker. Like, what was the journey to that? Now, I know you are a massive overachiever at school. You are highly intelligent. So going to medical school and becoming a psychiatrist is really not, a psychologist is really not that unexpected, I suppose, for people that would have known you in your childhood and through school. But
I do need to issue a brief correction. I did not go to medical school. I'm not a psychiatrist. I'm a psychologist. I went to a doctorate program in psychology. It was a
okay,
doctorate of philosophy in psychology.
but you totally could have gone to doctor school because you are very,
I
you are
considered
very
it.
clever. Yes.
Oh, thank you. That's very sweet.
I mean, I think if anything we've identified over the last few months is that you are a sponge and you're very, very, very clever and able to retain and understand all this content to be able to then distill it out again for someone else to actually do something with, which is an incredible skill in itself. But how did you end up doing what you're doing and then adapting into being an adaptability hacker?
Yeah, it's such a great question. So you kind of nailed it already. You kind of gave me the answer in the question, which is I'm incredibly curious. And so when someone comes to me and they're really struggling with something, the first thing I do is I look to listen. I'm trying to understand what is the set of circumstances. I'm trying to understand what is the set of reactions. I'm trying to understand what are your goals? What do you want? What is the outcome? And so there's a lot of trying to parse out all of those pieces. And as I'm with that person listening and trying to parse out all those pieces, and I got clinically trained, so I'm doing that in the therapy room in a different way than I do it in coaching, in a different way than I do it in consulting. What I found that's consistent across all of those things is I'm constantly trying to understand what is getting in the way, and in the way of what. So what is the goal? What's getting in the way, or what are the obstacles? And then I'm also trying to understand that many people, what they talk about is how their feelings or their reactions are the obstacle, how they're not able to make the changes that they want to make. And so I started also being very curious and trying to understand that. Well, what's getting in your way? And one of the things that started really showing up, first of all, is people are like, well, I want this thing and I'm so frustrated. And my frustration is the obstacle to getting the thing that I want. And so I started asking, well, can you help me understand? So what is your frustration trying to do? What do you want? What's getting in the way? And if this frustration is the problem, but what is it trying to do? How is it becoming the problem? And what might it be trying to do that it's becoming a problem? And so I started really asking these questions over and over again, and it started to really parse out. And what came up is the frustration itself isn't the problem. The obstacle is the problem.
Yeah. Okay.
Which is when frustration shows up. So frustration frequently shows up when we have a goal or a want or a need, and now there's an obstacle in the way. And it's a very present tense experience. It's a very present tense emotion. And so, yeah, so I just started asking all those questions.
Would we call time an obstacle?
Time can definitely be an obstacle. It may not be an obstacle that we can always move out of the way or change, right? So one of the answers sometimes to frustration might be it's not happening soon enough. So, and that happens a lot. Sometimes people want results, or they want their results now, or they want their goals. They want their goals now. You see that also a lot. I know you mentioned before kids. For any of you who have kids, you know exactly what that's like. Frustration is such a huge driver. And the other side of frustration is frustration tolerance. Sometimes we call that patience. Yeah. Being okay waiting, right? So, and it's really interesting because there's a lot of research on frustration tolerance and on patience, which is to say that we can't speed everything up, right? So I'll give you a personal example. When I was younger, I was in a rush to grow up. I wished that we could legally change our age the way we could change our names, because I was in such a rush to grow up. I was in 10th grade and I was taking my SATs, which is our like benchmark exam to go get into college, because I wanted to skip my senior year. Most people take it towards the end of their 11th grade and then they're applying to colleges. I was just really looking forward to finishing high school and getting out of there. I had a similar experience. You know, God bless my parents. My schools had wanted to skip me a couple of grades, and my parents were like, if we do that, what we're doing is trying to rush him academically. What we're not doing is allowing him to develop with his peers the skills he needs to be socially well adjusted. So, you know, bless them for being, and I have deep gratitude and also some frustration, but deep gratitude at the same time, because on the one hand, sure, I could have skipped a couple of grades and maybe I would be done a couple of years sooner, and maybe I would be here 2 years younger, maybe. I don't totally know. On the other hand, though, I had so much more opportunity. And I didn't just immediately fall behind peers who were, you know, much bigger and their brains were moving and developing differently than me, faster than mine, because they were a couple of years ahead of me. So one of the things that really shows up is I actually lost my train of thought. One of the things that shows up is,
I love this.
I know I went so deep down the rabbit hole there. I have so much appreciation for
time.
what. Yeah.
Time is where we started.
There we go. Thank you. I have so much appreciation for the need sometimes to slow down. And it's been a lifelong journey. I still get really frustrated all the time. There are things that I'm just like, okay, I made the decision. I want it to happen. Why is it not happening now? And so sometimes the response or the answer when you're frustrated is to acknowledge, yeah, you do wish that it could happen sooner. And what are the things you need to do? What is the order in which they need to get done? And is there any way to speed it up? Or is it going exactly at the rate that it can go? And if the answer is
or you start enjoying the journey and not just the end goal all the time, which is hard when you're impatient.
Right. That's a different, and that's tapping into a different feeling, which I think is very important and worthwhile to tap into, which is to say, sometimes you can have two different feelings at once. So your frustration tells you, I wish this could happen sooner. And there might be another feeling, which is, look what it is that I'm doing and experiencing. Look where it is that I'm going. I think, and this jumps into something else entirely, which is imposter syndrome. I call imposter syndrome the circumstance under which we stopped paying attention to our own development and our brain is further behind than we are. Like our story or our narrative about ourselves is actually a younger version or a previous version. It's kind of like if you opened up a book and instead of seeing the final product, you saw the first draft, and you judge the book on the first draft. That's what imposter syndrome is.
I've never heard of it described that way, but that's fantastic. That's actually, yeah. I mean, I think we all have imposter syndrome at some level or other, in different parts of our lives. But yeah, I've never heard of it described that way, where you're actually looking at a prior self as opposed to your current self, and that's the issue. But
yeah.
Then we must have some people that are looking at a very future self and thinking that they're there as well.
Yes. If you've ever talked to someone who was talking about themselves as if they were already somewhere they're not, you've seen that.
Yeah.
And in some moments, it's actually not a bad thing to do. It can help me draw myself toward the person I want to be. In other moments, it can really get in the way. It may really kind of push you. It might push other people away because you're talking about yourself as if you know, or as if you have expertise, or as if you are at a place that you're not. And that can actually generate other people looking at you or seeing you as though you're a big talker, but you don't really have, you can't put your money where your mouth is, right? And so, like I said, it's not what you're doing, it's why you're doing it. So, or how you're doing it sometimes as well. So if you're doing it in a way that's, here's who I want to be. And so I'm going to think about what I need to do to become that. And let me talk about who I want to be. And then it can draw you forward. But if you're like, here's how I want other people to see me, even though I'm not really that person, and I don't yet have the skills or abilities to do that, well, then you may find yourself caught in situations where the demands or the expectations are higher than where you're at. And your attempt to compensate for it may not be, might be a little too obvious. So people may see a little through that.
Yeah, I talk to clients about that all the time. It's one thing to talk about where you want to go, and it's and you should dream and have big goals, etc. But if you are going to continually show up as someone who you're not, or someone you think other people want you to be, that's not building a personal brand. That's being an actor. And it's so hard to continually show up like that. And then also when you're looking you're looking in the past, you've got imposter syndrome, which I've never thought of it like that, looking at old chapters. I mean, I get people to draw in old chapters all the time. That's what their personal brand is built from, all that knowledge, that expertise, the people they know, the things, the experiences they've had, etc. But talking about them with today's brain, talking about what they've learned from those experiences, talking about how they can now help other people with those experiences, shortcutting something for someone else because they've been through it. That's what we talk about as the here and now. And I can totally understand the whole imposter syndrome thing because you sit here today, and when you look back in the last 5 to 10 years or however long that it's taken you to get to this specific point, you can't really imagine how hard it was back there or what steps you took, because you forget, because we put
Hmm.
rose tinted glasses on. It can't have been as bad as all that. Something that, I've just set up my course on Thinkific. Well, 2 weeks ago, I was like, oh my God, this is so hard. Right now, I think the process is really easy because I've done the hard slog. So looking back, it seems
Hmm.
fine, but it didn't 2 weeks ago. So yeah, that whole imposter syndrome in acting is just, it cripples you. You can't last.
Yeah, and I think what you're pointing out is something else that is very important to understand with respect to imposter syndrome, which is that there's a difference between believing and thinking about myself as just the one way that I currently am, which is forever, versus saying that I'm a growing, thinking, feeling, growing person, that I can change, and that change can be in a direction that's really positive, and that I am more or better than I was yesterday.
Hmm.
And when you can understand that, well, we'll start with the other side, right? If I'm only just the one, and I'm gonna that way forever, and I'm never learning, I'm never growing, I'm never better or different than I was yesterday. Well, then imposter syndrome it makes total sense, because anytime I step into a situation and I'm not already perfect, I don't already have all those skills, well, then I'm going to get myself into trouble, is what basically my brain is telling me. Look, you don't fill those shoes, and you're never going to fill those shoes. And that's very different than saying, and this comes back to the updating thing, right? It's very different than saying, well, I'm on this current draft, and the next draft is going to be better, and the draft after that's going to be better. And you know what? Soon enough, sooner than I think, I will be able to fit in those shoes, or the book will be polished enough, right? So that when you open the pages, it's really going to read wonderfully. It's going to read well. And so it's not just, imposter syndrome is not just about a lack of updating my brain. It's that whenever I go to do something I've never done before, well, now I'm in a different circumstance. And so if I have this perception of myself that is just, a snapshot that's there forever, then yeah, when I step into a new situation, my brain's going to tell me that you don't belong here, and
Yeah.
you're not going to grow into it, as opposed to saying, I'm not here yet, but I decided I want to get here, or I decided I wanted to do this, and I'm going to learn, and I'm not perfect at it now, but guess what? In 6 months, or even in 2 weeks, right? It can be as little as a day. I will be better able to fit fill those shoes, or fit that, and so my book is going to look better in the next draft. And look, I'm doing the work right now. I'm doing the red ink, and I'm going over it, and I'm saying, here's what I need to change, and here's a little tweak I can make, and this plot point doesn't make sense, so let's make a change there. And when you do that work, and as you do that work consistently, you are growing into
the next chapter. Do you feel, when you're working with clients on this kind of stuff, that there is a difference between males and females? Because when I look at, we talk about it a lot here in Australia, women will generally go for a promotion or a higher level job when they're 110% ready for it, whereas men will go when they're 80% ready for it. Do you find in the business world and a lot of your clients, there's a gender difference there?
It's a good question. So I tend less to think in a gender way, in the sense of people have their own struggles, and men and women, some of them will have the same struggles and some of them will have different struggles. If you're asking if there's like a tip balance in one way or the other, I guess what I'm saying is I prefer less to categorize it by gender, and more to say, look at yourself and think about where you are. And are you, for example, in the case of the 80 versus 110% at the place of getting a promotion, I would say, how are you stretching yourself into where you want to be? That's the question to ask. Whether the person's 110 or at 80%, that's the question to ask when someone says, I want a promotion. This comes back to the kind of hacking, the adaptation hacking. Yeah. So, the question that I think is the important set of questions to answer, it's not, oh, well, if I say that it's men or women, then when you look at a man or you look at a woman, you can make this assumption about them. I don't think it's worth making the assumption ever. I think it's better to ask the question and say, where are you? Where do you want to go? What do you need in order to be getting closer to there? Or if you'd like to ask for it, what are things you need to do in order to be reasonable or reasonably comfortable, or you can reasonably assume that you're likely to be on the road there or likely to get it granted? So, the question to ask if someone wants a promotion is the position you want to be in. what are the requirements? What are the things that people need or learn? What are the minimum requirements? What are the nice things to have, the frills or the cherry on top? And ask them, how have you been moving your way towards that? Have you been asking or getting yourself ready to be in that position in some way, shape, or form? And if you've been doing some amount of that, whether you're at 80 or 110% of being in that new role, you get to say, hey, I've been working toward being in this new role. I would love to be in this new role.
So we are our own limits, is what you're saying.
Yes. Well, not always, but often we limit ourselves more.
Oh, yeah, I think so. I think a lot of people see us as being more capable than we see ourselves. We're sometimes a little bit slow in the uptake to what we are actually able to do.
Comes back to the imposter syndrome, right? And what you're talking about also is how other people perceive us versus how we perceive ourselves, which is very much connected to the idea of branding. My view of thinking about branding is about how others experience us. How I experience myself, or how I would like to experience myself, is my identity. And those two things are not always 100% aligned. What you're just saying is that a person might have one way of looking at themselves, and the way other people experience them may be very, very different. And those two things can be so differently aligned that I don't think I'm ready for promotion. And someone's like, look, I've just been waiting for you to ask, why have you been taking so long?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, that's why with clients, I do like a 360 audit of them with, and that's external people telling them what they see in that person. And some of the results some of them are very kind of standard and what you'd expect. And some of them people actually go, I had no idea that anybody noticed I do that. Those kind of things. And they're the kind of eye-opening moments where you say, well, that's your personal brand, and they're the things you can leverage off. That's your superpower. Whatever makes you weird is your superpower. That's my thing. I mean, I know that your superpowers are working with the feelings, but mine is whatever makes you a bit quirky and weird. That's what makes you stand out,
Yeah, that's how you get people to notice you and get to know who you are.
100%. 100%. Now, Dr. Yishai, what is your favorite book?
My favorite books, so I love the Harry Potter series. I mean, I have a lot of favorite books. I actually at some point made a list of books that I really like, which became a list of lists of books. But one of the things that really strikes me, and you and I actually had this conversation before, and I love this so much, is in the Harry Potter series. So you're going to get a little bit of spoilers if you haven't read it, but like it's been so long that I'm a little comfortable with that. Yeah. Very comfortable with that. So in it's either, I think it's book 5. One of the things that happens is Harry is having a hard time developing a romantic relationship. And so he turns it to Hermione and he asks her for advice, and he is telling her about Cho Chang, who he is interested in, but then also she's having all these reactions from what had happened in the previous book, and he's just like really struggling to make sense of it. And Ron's along in the conversation, and so Hermione's trying to explain what Cho is likely feeling to Harry, and then Ron butts in and says, nobody can feel that many things. They would explode. And then Hermione turns to Ron and says, just because you have the emotional range of a teaspoon doesn't mean that everybody else does. And to me, I thought that was such a meaningful, important point, which is to say, you can feel, and this comes back to something we were saying earlier, is you can feel so many different things at the same time. And that can be really challenging. Sometimes what happens when you're having more than one feeling is you get a new feeling, which is the overwhelm feeling, which is, there's just too much for me to be able to handle. But I just love that. I thought that was such an important point.
There's J.K. Rowling just nails it time and time again with those books. I mean, I reckon most of us that are in our 30s probably grew up reading them, and our life lessons came from Harry, Hermione, and Ron in some form or another.
There's a lot of stuff there, and yeah. I will also say that just because there are a lot of things in there that you can learn meaningfully from, that doesn't mean that you need to learn everything you learn from there. For example, if you think about Dumbledore as an administrator, he's not a particularly great administrator. He doesn't really protect a lot of the children in the castle, allowing Harry to run into danger multiple times. He calls it testing out his strength, which is wonderful for the story. And, in the story, Dumbledore's a wonderful guide. He's someone who allows and encourages and helps Harry develop himself. On the other hand, he's not somebody that I would necessarily want as a principal of a school if I were having a school.
So you can kind of understand why the Ministry of Defence stepped in like they did.
Well, like I said, it's not what you do, it's why you do it. So they stepped in for a whole other set of reasons. But, and I'm sure we can talk a lot about it. But I think it's important.
Yeah, I was going to say we could talk a lot more about Harry Potter, but we're here to find out more about you. So, Dr. Yishai, tell me about your podcast that you have. What kind of conversations are you having on the couch?
Oh, thank you. So it's called The Business Couch with Dr. Yishai. That's the name of the podcast. And what I do is I have conversations with entrepreneurs and business leaders. And the goal of them is to really dive into, very similar to the way I was talking about it before, I'm really curious. I'm curious to understand, how do people think? How do they problem solve, especially in the business space now? And so these are conversations that I have. They're kind of casual and at the same time really thoughtful conversations. They're not just run of the mill, tell me about your business. It's more about exploring, how did you build your business? What are the challenges? How did you overcome those challenges? And what are lessons that you learned? So, I release 3 episodes a week. The first episode every week is called Insight Sunday, drops on Sunday. And we talk about the mindset or the perspective of the entrepreneur business leader. We learn a little bit about where they came from or how they kind of built or developed their business and then how they think about it. And then on Story Tuesday, we talk about their learning experiences, situations that maybe didn't go as expected or that they were able to overcome challenges or adversity, or sometimes that they struggled to overcome it and then what they learned or took away from those things. So that's Story Tuesday. And then on Thrive Thursdays, I like to say it's just you and me on the couch. So that's where I talk a little bit about topics of the week, thoughts that I have, research and ways of thinking and understanding about business and leadership that I think are really important and sometimes or often are underexplored.
So who should listen to your podcast?
Yeah, so if you're an entrepreneur business leader, if you are really interested and into learning from others and the way that we can kind of raise each other up, not just on here's what you should do in business, though we have some tactical, kind of strategies you can take home with you, but it's not primarily just about that. It's about really becoming reflective and thinking about or being connected to how do you think, how are you approaching these things while also learning about, kind of business principles and different perspectives in that, then you'll feel right at home in our podcast.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Dr. Yishai. I've had fun as always. And this has actually been one of our shorter conversations because when we get chatting, we tend to go for a little bit longer than we do. But it's been fantastic. Now, how can anyone who's watching or listening get in touch with you or find you on social media? Where can we find you?
Yeah, great question. So I am on Facebook and Instagram as Dr. Yishai, on Instagram at Dr. Yishai, DRYISHAI. And then on LinkedIn, I am Yishai Barkadari. I know it's quite a mouthful. I'll spell it out for you, YISHAI. And then the last name is quite a long one, BARKHORDARI. So that's how I am on LinkedIn here. And my website is dryishai.com, DRYISHAI.com. So you can probably Google Dr. Yishai and I may show up in one form or another. Or you can, kind of Google Dr. Yishai Instagram or Dr. Yishai LinkedIn and I'll show up.
Well, I Googled you earlier and actually some very old blogs came up, some of your thought blogs from a few years ago. So there's lots on the internet about you. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I had a blog on overwhelm for about a year.
Yep.
Which I really enjoyed.
Massive topic. I mean, that overwhelm is one of the big things that you were working on when we first met. And I think it comes into practice like nearly every single day for anyone who's running a business. So super important. So Dr. Yishai, thank you so much. I'm going to put your links down below for anyone that wants to link up with you as well, in case they didn't quite get the spelling. But thank you so much for your time and I will chat to you soon.
Thank you. Such a joy to talk to you. It was such a pleasure as always.
Thank you.